Some wounds never heal, they just teach you how to bleed quietly. That's what I whispered to myself as I stared at the text message that shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. But let me back up because this story, my story, deserves to be told from the beginning, no matter how much it still makes my chest feel like it's caving in. My name is Brielle Winters, and I used to believe that loyalty was sacred, that friendship meant something, and that the people you trust with your deepest secrets would guard them like precious treasures. I used to believe in a lot of things that seem laughably naive now. It was a Tuesday when my life imploded. Not a Monday that you could blame for being inherently awful. Not a Friday that might excuse itself as the chaotic end of a long week. Just an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday that will forever be etched in my memory as the day I learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the knife aimed at your back. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop. Grounded, that little place on Maple Street with the mismatched chairs and the barista who always drew hearts in the foam, when my phone buzzed. The message was from an unknown number, but the words inside would haunt me for months to come. Thought you should know. Your best friend isn't who you think she is. Check her Instagram story from last night. The one she deleted this morning. I screenshot it. Attached was a photo that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. There she was. Ophelia Chen. My best friend since sophomore year of college, the girl who held my hair back when I was sick, who listened to me cry about my father's death for hours on end, who knew every single one of my secrets, fears, and dreams. Ophelia, who I trusted more than I trusted myself. And there he was beside her. Nathaniel Rivera. The man I had been madly, desperately, completely in love with for 8 months. The man whose name I whispered like a prayer when I couldn't sleep. The man I had confessed my feelings about to Ophelia just 3 weeks earlier, pouring my heart out over wine and Chinese takeout in her apartment. I think I'm in love with him I had said, using the nickname I'd called her since we were 19. Like, really in love. The kind that changes everything. She had looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Oh honey, you deserve someone who loves you back just as much. Don't settle for less." And now here they were in the photo, clearly in her bedroom. I recognized the vintage movie posters on her wall. Both of them disheveled, both of them glowing with that unmistakable post-sex radiance, both of them smiling like they shared the most delicious secret in the world. My coffee cup slipped from my hands and shattered against the floor, sending ceramic shards and lukewarm latte across the cafe tiles. The crash seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the shop, and I realized that everyone was staring at me. I must have made some kind of sound, a gasp, a whimper, a broken little cry, because the barista was already rushing over with a towel and a concerned expression. "Are you okay, hon?" No, I wasn't okay. I would never be okay again. I mumbled some excuse about being clumsy, threw a 20 on the counter, and stumbled out into the October afternoon. The world felt surreal, like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. The trees lining the sidewalk seemed too bright, their autumn colors almost violent against the steel-gray sky. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. My hands shook as I called Ophelia. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, she answered with that same cheerful voice I'd heard 1,000 times before. "Bree." Perfect timing. I was just thinking about. "We need to talk." The words came out flat, dead. "Now." There was a pause. A heartbeat of silence that stretched like an eternity. "What's wrong? You sound upset." Upset. As if what I was feeling could be contained in such a simple, inadequate word. "Meet me at Morrison Park. The bench by the duck pond. 15 minutes. Bree, what's?" I hung up. The walk to Morrison Park felt both endless and far too short. With every step, I replayed moments from our friendship, searching for signs I had missed, clues that should have warned me. Had there been lingering glances between them when we all hung out in groups? Had her questions about Nathaniel been more than friendly curiosity? I thought about the night 2 weeks ago when I'd called her crying because Nathaniel had been distant at a party, barely acknowledging me when I tried to talk to him. She had come over with ice cream and tissues, rubbing my back as I sobbed into her shoulder. "Maybe he's just not ready for something serious," she had said softly. "Maybe you should focus on yourself for a while." Had she known even then? Had she already been planning to swoop in and take what I desperately wanted? The park was nearly empty except for an elderly man feeding ducks and a jogger stretching against a tree. I sat on our usual bench, the same bench where we'd planned our post-graduation road trip, where we dissected bad dates and celebrated job interviews, where I told her about my father's cancer diagnosis. I waited. Ophelia arrived exactly 15 minutes later, slightly out of breath, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly chic. She was wearing the burgundy sweater I'd bought her for her birthday last year, and for some reason, that small detail felt like another betrayal. "Bree, what's going on? You're scaring me." I held up my phone, the screenshot displayed on the screen. I watched her face as she looked at it, watched as recognition dawned, watched as her complexion went from confused to pale to something that might have been defiant. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A duck quacked somewhere behind us, and the sound seemed obscenely normal in the face of this catastrophe. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" She sat down beside me on the bench, but I shifted away, putting distance between us. The same bench where we used to sit close enough that our shoulders touched now felt like a chasm. "Bree, I can explain." "Explain." The word came out like a bark of laughter, sharp and bitter. "Explain how you slept with the man I told you I was in love with? Explain how you looked me in the eye and gave me advice about him while you were planning to fuck him behind my back?" She flinched at my language, but I was beyond caring about decorum. "It wasn't planned. It just happened. It just happened." I repeated her words slowly, letting them sit in the air between us like poison. "That's your explanation?" "It just happened. We ran into each other at Rusty's last night. You know how you get when you drink whiskey, and we were talking about you actually, and—" "Stop." I held up my hand. "Stop right there. Do not try to make this about alcohol, and do not you dare try to tell me you were talking about me while you were deciding to betray me in the most devastating way possible." Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her like I had so many times before. The part of me that had always been soft-hearted toward her had died the moment I saw that photo. "I never meant for this to happen, Bree. I swear to you, I never planned it. But you did it anyway. She struggled for words, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. I was drunk, and he was there, and he was talking about how confused he's been about relationships lately, and one thing led to another. "Stop making excuses." The words exploded out of me, echoing across the park. The elderly man feeding ducks looked up in alarm. "You made a choice. You made a conscious decision to take off your clothes and get into bed with the man I told you I loved. You made a choice to post about it on social media like it was some kind of trophy. You made a choice to lie to my face when I called you earlier. I deleted the story as soon as I sobered up this morning. I realized it was a mistake. The mistake wasn't posting about it, Ophelia. The mistake was doing it in the first place. The mistake was betraying 8 years of friendship for one night with a guy who doesn't even want a relationship with anyone." That hit home. I could see it in her eyes, the way she winced as if I'd slapped her. "You think I don't know that?" Her voice cracked. "You think I don't know he was just using me? You think I don't know he probably only slept with me because he was drunk and I was available? Then why did you do it?" The question hung between us like a blade. She stared at her hands, twisted in her lap, and for a moment I thought she might actually tell me the truth. Instead, she gave me more excuses. "I don't know. I really don't know, Bree. I was drunk and lonely and I was your best friend who trusted you with everything." My voice broke on the last word, and I hated myself for showing weakness. "I told you things I've never told another living soul. I trusted you with my father's final words to me. I trusted you with my deepest insecurities, my biggest dreams, my heart. And you threw it all away for one night with a man who doesn't even want you." The tears were flowing freely down her face now, but I felt nothing but cold fury. "I know I fucked up. I know I ruined everything. But we can get past this, right? We can work through it. We've been through worse things together." I stared at her in disbelief. "Worse things? What could possibly be worse than this? When your dad died." "Don't." The word came out like a growl. "Don't you dare bring my father into this. When my father was dying, you held my hand. You brought me soup and tissues and stayed with me through the worst nights of my life. That's what friends do. They support each other through tragedy. They don't create the tragedy." I stood up from the bench, suddenly unable to sit still with the rage coursing through my veins. "You know what the worst part is? It's not even that you slept with him. It's that you knew. You knew exactly how I felt about him, and you did it anyway. You looked at my pain and my vulnerability, and you decided your momentary pleasure was more important than our entire friendship. That's not true. Isn't it? I spun around to face her. Tell me, Ophelia, when you were taking off your clothes in your bedroom, did you think about me? When you were kissing him, did you think about the conversation we had 3 weeks ago when I told you I was falling in love with him? When you woke up next to him this morning, did you think about how this would destroy me? Her silence was answer enough. You did think about it. And you decided I didn't matter enough to stop. Bree, please. You're my best friend. You're like a sister to me. Sisters don't do this to each other. Best friends don't do this to each other. People who love you don't do this to each other. I pulled out my phone and started deleting her number from my contacts, my fingers moving with a precision that surprised me given how badly my hands were shaking. What are you doing? What I should have done the moment I saw that photo. Bree, wait. We can fix this. We can go to therapy together, or take some time apart, or... There is no we anymore. I looked up from my phone and met her eyes one last time. There is no fixing this. There is no coming back from this. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. You're really going to throw away 8 years of friendship over one mistake? The audacity of that question hit me like a physical blow. I actually laughed, but it was a sound completely devoid of humor. I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. I'm just acknowledging reality. I started walking away, but her voice called after me. Bree, please. I love you. You're my best friend in the whole world. I made a terrible mistake, but I love you. I stopped walking but didn't turn around. If that's what you call love, Ophelia, then I want nothing to do with it. And I kept walking. I didn't look back, not even when I heard her start to cry in earnest, broken sobs that echoed across the park. I walked back to my car with my head held high and my heart completely shattered. That night, I blocked her on every social media platform, deleted every photo of us together from my phone, and threw away every gift she'd ever given me. I packed up the box of memories I kept in my closet. Concert tickets from shows we'd attended together, letters she'd written me during her semester abroad, inside jokes written on napkins, and I threw it all in the dumpster behind my apartment building. It took me 3 hours to erase 8 years of friendship from my life, and even then, I knew the memories would linger like ghosts in every corner of my world. The hardest part wasn't the big things. It was the small ones. It was realizing I couldn't call her when something funny happened at work. It was seeing her favorite coffee drink on a menu and feeling that pang of loss. It was having to find someone else to be my emergency contact, to remove her as my +1 from a wedding invitation, to explain to mutual friends why we suddenly weren't speaking. Nathaniel tried to reach out to me a few days later. I let his call go to voicemail and deleted it without listening. Whatever he had to say, whether it was an apology, an explanation, or an attempt to start something with me now, I didn't want to hear it. He had been a dream, a fantasy, a beautiful possibility that was never really mine to begin with. Ophelia had been real. She had been my family, my sister, my safe harbor in every storm. And that's what made her betrayal so much worse. I spent weeks replaying every interaction we'd had, looking for signs I'd missed. Had she always been jealous of me? Had she always been competitive? Or was this truly just a moment of weakness that spiraled out of control? In the end, it didn't matter. The why didn't change the what, and the what was unforgivable. I learned things about myself during those dark weeks that followed. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive the loss of someone who felt essential to my existence. I learned that some betrayals cut so deep they fundamentally change who you are. I learned that forgiveness isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just another word for letting people continue to hurt you. I also learned that some people in your life are there to teach you lessons, and sometimes the lesson is about your own worth, your own boundaries, your own capacity to walk away from something that's destroying you, even when walking away feels impossible. 3 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Nathaniel and Ophelia weren't together. Apparently, their night together had been just that. One night. He'd made it clear he wasn't interested in a relationship with her, and she'd been left with nothing but the wreckage of our friendship to show for her betrayal. I felt no satisfaction in this news. There was no vindication, no sense of justice served. There was just the hollow ache of loss and the bitter taste of being right about something I wished I'd been wrong about. I ran into her once, about 6 months later, at the grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle, debating between two brands of granola, when I looked up and there she was. She looked thinner, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the narrow aisle. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi. How are you?" The question seemed absurd given everything that had happened, but I answered anyway. "I'm fine. I think about you every day," she said, and I could see tears forming in her eyes again. "I miss you so much it physically hurts." I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no sympathy. Just a vast empty space where my feelings for her used to live. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry that she was in pain, the same way I'd be sorry to hear that any human being was suffering. But it wasn't my problem anymore. "Bree, please. Can we talk? Can we try to?" "No." The word was gentle but final. "We can't." I put the granola in my cart and walked away, leaving her standing there in the cereal aisle with tears streaming down her face. That was 2 years ago. I still think about her sometimes, usually when something happens that I would have immediately called to tell her about. But the ache has faded to a distant soreness, like an old injury that only hurts when the weather changes. I've made new friends, built new relationships, learned to trust again, though perhaps not as easily or completely as before. I've discovered that I'm perfectly capable of being happy without her, that I don't need someone who could betray me so thoroughly to validate my worth or share my joy. The man I'm dating now knows the story. I told him early on, not as a warning but as an explanation for why I sometimes need extra reassurance, why I sometimes test boundaries in small ways to see if he'll respect them, why I've learned to guard my heart a little more carefully. "Some people are just lessons," he said when I finished telling him. "Hard lessons, but lessons all the same." He was right. Ophelia taught me that loyalty isn't just about the big moments. It's about the small choices we make every day. She taught me that trust, once broken, doesn't just glue back together like a vase. It's more like an eggshell. Even if you could somehow piece it back together, it would never be strong enough to hold anything precious again. Most importantly, she taught me that I am worth more than someone's moment of weakness. I am worth more than being someone's second choice, someone's mistake, someone's regret. I am worth friends who would rather cut off their own hands than hurt me the way she hurt me. And perhaps in the strangest way, I should thank her for that lesson. Not the lesson I wanted to learn, but the lesson I needed to learn. Some wounds never heal. They just teach you how to bleed quietly. But some wounds also teach you how to walk away from the people holding the knife, how to build walls high enough to protect yourself while still keeping your heart open to people who deserve to be there. I'm stronger now, wiser now, more careful now. I'm also lonelier in some ways, more suspicious, quicker to pull back when something doesn't feel right. But I'd rather be alone than be with someone who would trade my trust for a moment of selfish pleasure. Ophelia Chen taught me what friendship isn't. She taught me what love isn't. She taught me what loyalty isn't. And in the end, perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of all. I just wish it hadn't cost me 8 years of believing I'd found a sister, only to discover I'd been sleeping next to an enemy who was wearing her face. Some betrayals are so profound they echo through every relationship that comes after. But some betrayals also teach you that you're strong enough to survive anything, even the loss of someone you thought you couldn't live without. I lived. I thrived. I learned. And I never looked back. The duck pond at Morrison Park still exists. The bench where our friendship died is still there, weathered and worn by seasons of rain and sun. Sometimes I drive by it on my way to other places, and I remember the girl I used to be. The one who believed that love and loyalty were simple things, that friendship was sacred, that the people who knew your secrets would guard them like treasure. I'm not that girl anymore. The woman I became is harder perhaps, but she's also unbreakable in ways that girl never was. And maybe that's enough. But the story doesn't end there, because healing isn't linear, and closure isn't always immediate. 6 months after that encounter in the grocery store, I received a handwritten letter slipped under my apartment door. I recognized Ophelia's careful handwriting immediately. I stared at that envelope for 3 days before opening it, her final attempt to explain herself, to claim she'd been devastated and drunk, that she'd been seeing a therapist who diagnosed her with abandonment trauma. The letter was full of psychological explanations and heartfelt apologies, but something about it felt calculated, manipulative. She claimed she'd destroyed the most important relationship in her life because she was too broken to think straight. But the letter itself proved she was perfectly capable of strategic thinking when it served her purposes. I kept the letter for weeks, reading it repeatedly, trying to decide if her remorse was genuine. Then I overheard a conversation at a coffee shop that answered my question. Two women were discussing someone named Ophelia who was going through a rough time, but had become bitter and negative. One mentioned that this Ophelia claimed her best friend had abandoned her over one mistake, and never took responsibility for what she'd actually done. That night, I burned the letter in my fireplace. The woman who'd written those apologetic words to me was telling everyone else that I'd overreacted to her innocent mistake. Even her remorse was a lie, another manipulation tactic designed to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. That was when I finally understood that the person I'd loved had never really existed. The final revelation came a year later when our mutual friend Rebecca called me. "I need to tell you something about Ophelia that I should have told you years ago," she said. "She was always jealous of you, Bree. Even in college. She used to say things about how everything came easily to you, how you never had to work for friendships the way she did." My stomach dropped. What kind of things? Mean things. When you got that internship senior year, she said it was only because you were prettier. When you dated Tom junior year, she said he was only with you because you were easy. She made us promise not to tell you because she said you'd be devastated. Why are you telling me this now? Because she's been doing it again. Ever since you two stopped being friends, she's been telling everyone that you were jealous and possessive, that you cut her off because you couldn't handle her having other relationships. And there's more. The night she hooked up with Nathaniel? She asked me specifically about your feelings for him earlier that week. She was fishing for information so she'd know exactly how much it would hurt you. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Ophelia hadn't just made a terrible decision. She'd been systematically undermining me for years while pretending to be my loyal friend. She'd planned the ultimate betrayal specifically because she knew it would destroy me. That conversation was the final piece of the puzzle. Ophelia Chen had never been my friend. She'd been my enemy, keeping me close so she could monitor my happiness and find ways to undermine it. The sister I'd mourned had never existed outside of my own imagination. And that realization finally set me free. But freedom from betrayal doesn't come easily or all at once. It's a process that unfolds in waves, each revelation bringing its own form of pain and, eventually, its own form of healing. In the months that followed Rebecca's call, I found myself revisiting memories with new eyes, understanding dynamics I'd been blind to for years. The way Ophelia would subtly redirect conversations when I was excited about something good happening in my life. How she'd always had a reason why my successes weren't quite as impressive as they seemed. The way she'd position herself as the voice of reason, the protective friend who was just being realistic about my prospects. I remember the night I'd gotten my first promotion at work, how I'd called her bubbling with excitement, and how she'd immediately started talking about how corporate promotions were just politics, and that the real test would be whether I could actually handle the responsibility. At the time, I'd thought she was trying to keep me grounded. Now I understood she was trying to steal my joy. There was the time I'd been nervous about a first date with someone I really liked, and she'd spent an hour helping me get ready by pointing out everything that could go wrong, every way he might not be that interested, every reason why I should lower my expectations. I'd gone on that date feeling anxious and insecure instead of confident and excited. The relationship never developed, and I'd blamed myself for not being interesting enough. Now I wondered if that had been her intention all along. The pattern was everywhere once I started looking for it. Ophelia had been a master at disguising cruelty as care, jealousy as concern, sabotage as friendship. She'd positioned herself as my protector while actively working to undermine my confidence and happiness. But perhaps the most insidious part was how she'd made me complicit in my own diminishment. She'd trained me to seek her approval, to value her opinion above my own instincts, to believe that her realistic perspective was more trustworthy than my natural optimism. She'd convinced me that I needed her to keep me grounded, when in reality, she'd been systematically clipping my wings. I started therapy with Dr. Sarah Kim, a specialist in toxic relationships and emotional abuse. It took months of sessions before I could even use the word abuse to describe what had happened to me. Ophelia had never hit me, never screamed at me, never overtly threatened me. But she had spent years eroding my self-confidence, isolating me from other potential friendships, and making me dependent on her validation. Emotional abuse doesn't always look like what we expect, Dr. Kim explained during one of our sessions. Sometimes it looks like a friend who's always there to catch you when you fall, but who's also the one pushing you off balance in the first place. That description fit Ophelia perfectly. She'd created problems and then positioned herself as the solution, generated insecurities and then offered herself as the only source of comfort. She'd made herself indispensable by systematically making me believe I couldn't trust my own judgment. The work of undoing that conditioning was harder than I'd expected. I had to relearn how to trust my own instincts, how to celebrate my successes without immediately looking for reasons they didn't count, how to enter new relationships without constantly scanning for signs of hidden resentment or competition. I had to grieve not just the friendship I'd lost, but the version of myself I'd been before Ophelia's influence had shaped me. The confident, optimistic girl I'd been at 18 had been gradually eroded over the years, replaced by someone who second-guessed herself constantly, who downplayed her achievements, who expected disappointment as a form of protection. But grief, I learned, can be transformative when you let it run its course instead of rushing to get past it. As I mourned the years I'd spent under Ophelia's influence, I also began to rediscover the parts of myself she'd tried to diminish. I started saying yes to opportunities that the old me would have talked myself out of. I applied for a position at a different company that offered more responsibility and better pay. I joined a hiking group and made friends who celebrated my accomplishments without immediately following up with caveats or concerns. I started dating someone who thought my enthusiasm and optimism were assets rather than naive traits that needed to be managed. Slowly, carefully, I began to rebuild my sense of self on a foundation that was mine alone. The process wasn't linear. There were days when I missed the familiarity of our toxic dynamic, when I caught myself wanting to call Ophelia to process something difficult, forgetting momentarily that she had never actually been the supportive friend I'd believed her to be. There were moments when I wondered if I was being too harsh, if I was rewriting history to make myself feel better about cutting her off. But then I would remember the careful premeditation of her betrayal, the way she'd specifically sought information about my feelings for Nathaniel so she could cause maximum damage, the years of subtle undermining disguised as friendship. And I would remember that protecting myself from someone who had actively worked to harm me wasn't cruelty. It was survival. I ran into her one more time, about a year after Rebecca's revelations. I was at a coffee shop near my new office when I looked up from my laptop and saw her standing in line, looking thinner and more haggard than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met across the crowded space, and I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe guilt, possibly hope. She started to move toward my table, and I felt my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. But this time, instead of the old programmed response to make myself available for whatever she needed, I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. It was the first time in our entire relationship that I had prioritized my own comfort over her desires, and the feeling was both terrifying and liberating. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for 10 minutes, shaking from the adrenaline of that simple act of self-preservation. But I also felt proud. Proud that I'd recognized a potentially harmful situation and removed myself from it. Proud that I'd chosen my own peace over the familiar drama of engaging with someone who had proven herself untrustworthy. Proud that I'd finally learned to put my own well-being first. That small moment of choosing myself over the pull of our toxic history felt like a graduation of sorts. I'd finally, truly moved beyond the influence Ophelia had held over my life for so long. The woman I am today bears little resemblance to the person I was during our friendship. I'm more confident, more decisive, more willing to trust my own judgment. I have friends who genuinely celebrate my successes, who support my dreams without undermining them, who show up consistently without keeping score. I have a partner who thinks my optimism is one of my most attractive qualities, who encourages me to take up space and pursue my ambitions, who has never once made me feel like I need to diminish myself to make him comfortable. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not the complex power dynamics and hidden resentments that had characterized my friendship with Ophelia. I've learned to recognize red flags early, the subtle digs disguised as humor, the friends who seem to enjoy your failures a little too much, the people who make you feel like you need to earn their approval instead of simply enjoying your company. I've learned that healthy relationships should add to your life, not subtract from it. Most importantly, I've learned that loyalty is earned, not owed. Just because someone has been in your life for a long time doesn't mean they deserve to stay there if they're actively working against your happiness. Just because someone calls themselves your friend doesn't mean they actually have your best interests at heart. Some people come into your life to love you, and some come to teach you hard lessons about love. Ophelia taught me that friendship requires more than shared history and familiar habits. It requires genuine care, honest communication, and a fundamental respect for each other's well-being. She taught me that trust is precious and should be guarded carefully, that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation, and that walking away from someone who hurts you isn't giving up, it's growing up. She taught me that I am worth more than someone's competitive insecurity, more than being someone's emotional punching bag, more than staying in relationships that require me to make myself smaller to avoid conflict. And perhaps most importantly, she taught me that the people who truly love you will want to see you shine, not dim your light to make themselves feel better. I think about her sometimes, usually when I'm particularly happy about something and I catch myself bracing for criticism that no longer comes. I wonder if she ever figured out why her relationships keep failing, if she ever learned to celebrate other people's successes, if she ever found peace with her own insecurities instead of taking them out on the people closest to her. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. She occupies the same space in my mind as other closed chapters, acknowledged but not dwelled upon, learned from but not mourned. I have a life full of people who deserve to be in it now. I have friends who text me when good things happen in their lives because they know I'll be genuinely excited for them. I have colleagues who value my contributions without needing to minimize them. I have a partner who thinks I'm amazing not despite my confidence and ambition, but because of them. I have learned to be my own best friend first, which means I no longer tolerate treatment from others that I wouldn't accept for myself. The girl who believed everyone deserved endless chances wasn't wrong to be compassionate, but the woman I've become has learned that compassion must include compassion for herself. The woman I've become knows that some people will mistake kindness for weakness, generosity for obligation, and love for something they can exploit without consequence. And the woman I've become is wise enough to recognize those people early and strong enough to walk away before they can cause the kind of devastation Ophelia caused. Some wounds do teach you how to bleed quietly, but they also teach you how to heal completely. They teach you how to build better boundaries, choose better people, and most importantly, how to choose yourself when choosing yourself is what survival requires. I am stronger now, wiser now, more selective now. I am also happier, more authentic, and more at peace with myself than I ever was during those 8 years of friendship with someone who was systematically working against my best interests. And maybe that's the real victory. Not that I survived her betrayal, but that I used it to become someone who could never be betrayed in the same way again. The duck pond at Morrison Park is still there, but I drive a different route to work now. Not because I'm avoiding the memories, but because I've moved on to a life that doesn't require me to revisit the places where I used to be smaller, less confident, less sure of my own worth. The bench where our friendship died has become just another bench in just another park in a city full of places where better things have happened since then. It has no power over me anymore. No ability to make me doubt the choices I made or the boundaries I set. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation or vindication. It's simply living well, loving yourself completely, and surrounding yourself with people who enhance rather than diminish who you are. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. I thanked Rebecca for her honesty, asked her to please not engage with Ophelia's revisionist history of our friendship, and then I did something I should have done years earlier. I stopped caring about Ophelia Chen entirely. I stopped wondering what she was doing, stopped caring about her opinion of me, stopped hoping she'd eventually understand what she'd done wrong. I stopped carrying the weight of our failed friendship like a stone in my chest. She had never been worthy of my love, my trust, or my grief. She had been a lesson disguised as a blessing, a warning disguised as a friend. Some people come into your life to love you, and some come to teach you how to love yourself enough to walk away from people who don't deserve you. Ophelia taught me that friendship, like love, requires honesty, loyalty, and genuine care for the other person's well-being. She taught me that some people are so broken by their own insecurities that they can't bear to see others happy. She taught me that trust once lost can never truly be rebuilt, and that sometimes that's exactly as it should be. Most importantly, she taught me that I am strong enough to survive the loss of anyone who doesn't truly value me, and wise enough to build better boundaries around my heart. Today, I have friends who celebrate my successes instead of resenting them, who protect my secrets instead of weaponizing them, who would cut off their own hands before deliberately causing me pain. I have a partner who sees my worth and reflects it back to me daily, who makes me feel safe and cherished and understood. I have a life full of people who actually deserve to be in it. And maybe that's the real ending to this story. Not the dramatic confrontation at Morrison Park, not the burned letter or the chance encounters, but the quiet moment when I realized I had built something beautiful from the ashes of something toxic. The girl who believed that loyalty was sacred wasn't wrong. She just gave her loyalty to the wrong person. The woman I became learned to be more discerning with that precious gift. And in the end that made all the difference.